for now, and I think we can open it up to questions. We'll have Tim come back up and do kind of a joint Q&A here.
On the Detroit-Chicago corridor, we've been at 110 on Amtrak's 100 miles of ownership for going on 3 years now. So the largest piece, 110 mile in operations outside the northeast corridor. So yeah, that's been very good. We're finishing up our major construction on 135 miles that we purchased, and as you mentioned, we're hoping to take that approximately 20 minutes out of schedule. That'll cut us down to one crew. So it's kind of a quick update.
I just have a quick question. When will the Tiger grants be announced?
Who knows?
Ooh, yeah, we don't know.
It just depends on their schedule. They don't have.
We have deadlines when we need to apply. Federal government does not have deadlines when we need to.
Yeah. Mark.
You mentioned briefly the slides of locomotives. They're going to be leased to Amtrak for a period of time. Do I infer from that you're going to permit competitive bidding to operate this service?
Not at the in the immediate future. Not at the moment. They're going to be leased. They're leased to Amtrak to maintain the locomotives. We have separate agreements right now with Amtrak to operate the services. But the plan is, after the warranty period, that we go out with an RFP for a maintainer. That could be a third party.
Under the PREA law, you can prevent you to hire anybody you want to run the service. Doesn't have to be Amtrak.
Well, even before PREA, the states could hire anybody they wanted to, but there's been too many roadblocks in front of hiring anybody but Amtrak. But as Arun said, the idea is that during this warranty period, the states weren't ready to take over the maintenance of our own equipment, and it's a convenience to have Amtrak do it for this interim period.
Tim, I have a question for you about the service in Detroit. If you want to put on additional trains, it's your own railroad. But what does the piece that you don't own, how did the freight railroads own that piece take to that? Are they going to require you to put in some additional crossovers and signals?
Well, one of the things, one of the projects that I had on my slides that I didn't mention was the Indiana Gateway. And it was a series of crossovers and third tracks in Indiana on the Norfolk Southern Main Line. And as a part of the federal funding for that, there were slots available for additional trains. Also, as part of the work we're doing on the programmatic EIS service development plan on the Detroit-Chicago corridor, we did a capacity analysis of the line, particularly for Canadian National. And we'll start the negotiations now with them as to what improvements that we need. And really, to just add a couple of trains, there isn't anything. If you want to get up into 25 trains, then there's a lot of work needed.
You mentioned that Michigan was very aggressive with their fare hikes earlier.
Yeah.
Was that in conjunction with that rising bills that you were getting or billing from Amtrak, or was that for other reasons?
No, I mean, one of the things that Arun mentioned, you have a very good fare box recovery ratio because of the efficiencies you have on your services. We're not so fortunate, and to be able to show our legislators that we are trying to extort as much money out of the passenger as we're trying to extort out of government is always a good thing. So, I extort money and launder it too, so our finance people don't like it, but they're used to it.
Yes.
Ryan again saying now, when I'm talking to people outside somewhere like WisARO, I'm a lot nicer about things like the high water service than I may be now. So I just want to put that as a preliminary. Tim talked about a Midwest system, and you alluded to it in your presentation. But in reality, the higher water line is not part of a system. Either the train arrives later, very shortly after one of the outgoing regional services departs, or typically there is a 90-minute layover in Chicago to carry on going south. So I think currently it's difficult to describe it as a system. So
I wouldn't disagree with you on that.
but my question was going to be, you talked about connections, but it is technically possible with the existing track at Chicago Union, and it has been done in the past, to run through trains. Now, I wasn't sure from your comment about whether or not this was going to be a through train or a better connection. And a through train gives better equipment utilization, and people recognize it as much more useful than a connection. The other thing that I was going to ask, when you were looking at the passenger equipment that you're looking to acquire, the equipment that we currently use on the Hiawatha is not only obsolete, it was obsolete when it was built in 1990. There is no step-free access. I mean, talk about disabled access. We recently took the train. My wife had trouble just walking up and down the steps. So my fear is that we might be buying the next generation of obsolete equipment. And I appreciate your assurances on that.
Well,
I assure we are buying the next generation of obsolete equipment, and there really is not a whole lot that you can do about it. If you want to wait 10 years, then, because you have to understand, if you're starting from whole cloth on equipment right now, there's a 36 to 48 month period that the manufacturer has to go through before he gets notice to proceed. Okay? If you're buying something that's been produced, it's less than 24 months. Okay? And that is just the reality of the world. We do not manufacture enough intercity or commuter rail equipment in this country to be competitive. And we are prohibited because of what I call the seatbelt and the belt and suspenders safety regulations that we have in this country from importing something if you're going to put it on the freight network. As far as the interconnectivity and all of that, you're right. I would challenge, though, and say probably the most efficient use of equipment that you can get, even if you throw run-through service in, is what the Hiawatha does today. You run the wheels off of equipment. And you look at, actually, when we did part of the analysis to put the new locomotives out there, we looked at it and said, putting them on the Hiawatha or the Blue Water is probably the best place you can run the miles off them as quickly as possible. So when you talk about a Midwest brand, you are going to talk about cross-platform transfers in Chicago at this time, okay? Trying to improve and make those connections, and this man has been very instrumental on finding where those misconnections are and trying to steer us towards tweaks of the schedules to better cooperate that. I, on the longer term, look at it like this. Chicago will become just another station stop. It does not have to be the alpha and omega of every train. And we need to look at the system that way so that you do start to look at more run-throughs. And it is somewhat problematic with only one run-through track in Chicago, and there are studies underway to look at Chicago Union Station, CUS, to see how you can get better efficiencies in that on it. Because frankly, there's as with almost every major passenger train station in this country, the predominant use is commuter, and the intercity use is secondary. So Arun,
yeah, let me just add for the connections question. So run through train right now with a 7 round trip Hiawatha schedule. There's 2 consists that ping back and forth like that, and so it would be challenging to introduce a run-through train as one of those, because then you'd have a situation where one of the Hiawatha sets is not in the right place where it needs to be to operate the other one. As part of the 10 round trip thing, we've been looking at incremental improvements to 8, 9, and 10. When you go to 8 round trips, then it's a challenge with the going back and forth. That's where we're actually looking at a run-through St. Louis train. to Milwaukee, which would actually give that, allow that 8 round trip schedule to work fairly well. And it would restore, as you said, there was previous run-through trains. Milwaukee to St. Louis was one of them. It would restore that Milwaukee to St. Louis through service. That would be a fantastic outcome, I think, of an 8 round trip schedule. But in terms of the connections and misconnections, you're right. Some of the connections are not ideal right now, and that's what we're trying to look at to fix. Even with the current schedules now, and with the revised schedules for Michigan and Illinois, to see if we can tighten up those connections, make some more competitive connections. Right now, a little over 10% of Hiawatha passengers are transferring to other services. Given the Hiawatha ridership, it's still a significant amount, but that, I think, is a growth area. That's how we can help fill those off-peak trains. We have to fix these connections and make them work better. So, for all of our services. And then I just wanted to address the equipment, the accessibility onto the equipment, and I couldn't agree with you more on the current equipment. I mean, it was outdated, so outdated when it was built. It's amazing that equipment was built in the late 80s, when equipment built in Europe and elsewhere, but it's just in the late 80s drastically different. Everybody knows that. But that being said, Amtrak has done a very good job in making the best of that equipment, especially in recent years. But with this new equipment that's being looked at in the new coaches, I can say that it does have automatic car-borne lifts, huge improvements in accessibility. Features like LED lighting. There are aspects of it that are state-of-the-art modern thing. There's still going to be heavy steel things because this is the U.S. and we're operating on shared use corridors, and we have these requirements. But I think in some aspects they will be up to date, state of the art. And
on that, I mean, a lot of the ADA work, with the built-in lifts and all of that's going to be a big improvement. But one of the things going from a single level to a bi-level to a single level, most likely, is what it looks like now. If you put if we have rebuilt all our platforms for the new equipment, we have to rebuild all our platforms for the new equipment. So it is, one of the conundrums we deal with, particularly in the Midwest, is we're on shared use corridors, as Arun mentioned, with the freight railroads. So we can't put level boarding in on a high level piece of equipment. And most likely in a single level piece, that's what it's going to be. So.
For Arun, and a suggestion after what you raised about Madison. About 4 weeks ago, I was in Milwaukee and wanted to check out the airport connection. I was extremely impressed. I took, I think it was an 80 or 81 bus from the city core out to the airport. I wanted to see how that worked. And then I got on the shuttle, and the shuttle guy I got gave me the grand tour. I told him I was from Minnesota, and he said, "Oh, well, this is how it works." He stopped and he said, "Well, this is the station. See how nice it is? It's heated and air conditioned. And here's a button. If I'm not here, you don't need a phone. Just hit this red button." And then he took me back, and I looked at how the signage was, where you come down the escalator. I went right on. So that's my first quick compliment, and I just had to share that with you. This guy was extremely enthusiastic. His name was James. Great guy. Second one, though, you talked about Madison, and I wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for some wonderful people in this room who ended up being my Uber. Getting here was really interesting. I could talk about that all day long from my Amtrak responses, etc. But I had 2 suggestions that we've looked at from the Minnesota side. In the connection from Columbus, or whatever city you pick, but looks like you're looking at Columbus, which is our leaning too, for the westbound trains, for the second train and for the building, for the westbound, because you have such great connections on the buses from here to Milwaukee and Chicago going east, we're suggesting that those are the 2 things you have to look at, those 2 trains that are westbound, because they're more dependable, more on time. So that would, I'm thinking it's your first thing to look at, from my point of view. I don't know how that works money-wise, but that's my suggestion to you. Hopefully, wow.
Thank you, thank you for that. Just a reminder that also, though, for the westbound connection, and this is something that we can improve on, but the Madison to Green Bay bus, that is an Amtrak Thruway bus at Columbus for that westbound connection. It arrives there is a 2-hour layover, though, in Columbus. It arrives at 3 p.m. in Columbus, and the train leaves at 5, westbound train leaves at 5:08 or something. But yeah, well, thank you for that.
Okay, well, let's thank our presenters.
For those that have questions.